I think the most challenging hurdle in general is for the person to be ready for a change. Usually when they come to me, they're ready for that change. And there's this famous quote by Jack Dixon, and he says, if you want results, you'll never change. But if you want change, you'll get results.
Because Mauritius is such a tiny island, I'm always surprised where people come from far away and they live here. You're American. What brings an American to tiny dot of an island like Mauritius?
Tiny little dot, yes. Well, first of all, I love Mauritius. I've been here now for 15 years. I came here to help set up Aspen Pharmaceutical Company in the north, and it's a great company. I came because I used to work in pharma. I worked at Lilly in the US, and I came to help set it up. So I had always been traveling, and I had studied abroad, and I was always interested in living or exploring somewhere else. And so when this opportunity came up, I really just took it in a heartbeat. And I had worked at Aspen before I'm doing what I'm doing now.
And did you hear about Mauritius before? Did you know where Mauritius was?
No, most Americans are geographically challenged. No, I really didn't know. I mean, there were a couple of people that were working at Lilly and went to Aspen before I had gone. So that's how I had heard about Mauritius. But before that, I hadn't known about it, because in the US, most people, if they're gonna go to a vacation destination, they go to Hawaii or the Caribbean. So Mauritius would be too far. It's like 36 hours of travel.
Of course. And how did you, was it a bit of a culture shock when you came here? Or were you mentally prepared for the difference in culture and the way people live, the language?
Well, actually, no. I think because I had traveled so much, I was okay. I remember on the interview before I'd come here, the person who was interviewing me said, there's no Walmart in Mauritius. I said, yeah, I'm fine with that. And no, I think it was fine. In fact, I found it, for me, the biggest, most exciting thing at the time, because I was a workaholic at that time, was the fact that it was easy to find someone who could help you cook and clean at home, because that wasn't very common, where I was and at my age and those types of things. And that saved me time, right? And so It was, the quality of life went up because I lived in a beautiful place and I didn't have to do some of the domestic stuff that I actually didn't like to do. And then I could just work and grow. And that, at the time, that's all I wanted to do, was to work and then enjoy the beach on the weekends. So people are nice here, but in terms of culture, I think I adapt to different cultures, so it was fine. And sometimes I have a harder time going back to the US after having lived somewhere than the other way around.
Yeah, I hadn't appreciated that you were working in pharma before. How do you go from pharma to what you do now? Because it seems to be quite different.
It's very different. So I remember interning at different industries and Toyota, and I remember not feeling driven to do what they wanted me to do. And when I worked at Lilly, it felt like, okay, we were saving lives. I mean, because that's what pharmaceuticals do. And I was really passionate that I was going into that type of company. Then, because I was a workaholic and I was a high achiever, even an overachiever, I also was not living the healthiest lifestyle. And I had so many health issues. So in my 20s, I had IBS and high cholesterol, prediabetes, panic attacks, anxiety issues, chronic sinuses, allergies, hormone issues, anemia. I mean, fainting episodes. I had all sorts of things. And they say if you don't listen to the whispers, then you'll hear it scream. And finally, I realized I've got to change something. And so at one point in time, I think I was blaming my work-life imbalance and my health issues on corporate. But it actually had nothing to do with corporate. It was because I didn't learn the skill of managing my own energy or kind of listening to the signs of what my body was telling me. So corporate and pharma is interesting because it's corrective. There's medicines that do save a lot of lives. What I realized, because I had been on pharmaceuticals and they weren't really helping me, I wanted to get more in the preventative place. And so when I left and I took time off and I started to learn a little bit more on nutrition, I started taking courses. and learning to meditate, which I was a complete skeptic on, learning to cook, which I didn't know how to do before, all these things, everything started to shift. All my health issues went away. And I became so passionate to be able to help others in a more preventative way. Now, we need modern medicine, we need pharmaceuticals because the world wouldn't function without them. But I do believe that the percentage of people on prescription medication is probably higher than it needs to be, because there's a lot of lifestyle and balance and other things that we can do, and even psychology, other things like self-worth and all these other things that if we learn those ropes, we're less likely to be actually needing any medication. So pharma has its place, but then because of all my health issues, it landed me in this spot to be able to help others to relieve their health issues or their stress, their anxiety, those types of things.
But in terms of mindset, do you find that, because sometimes one of the things I struggle with daily is to find sometimes resistance in terms of the mindset that because the pharmaceuticals are available, I don't actually need to focus too much on the prevention. So there's this disengagement, if you will, from the everyday man in saying that, oh, it's okay, I can eat all the cake I want because I can just take my diabetes medication. And I think that's a great shame. I'm a full believer of prevention is better than cure. Do you find, like, since you've started doing the work that you do, that there is a change of mindset, that people are willing to, eat properly, exercise better, take better care of their mental and physical health, rather than just be resigned to, oh, it's okay, I've got medicine?
Well, I think it depends on the person's mindset and where they're at on their journey, because this magic pill is often more enticing for a lot of people. Magic pill, whether it is a prescription medication, whether it is alcohol or some sort of escape, whether it is some sort of distraction, there's a lot of, or even work, achievement, those types of things. These are all things that we're looking on the outside to fix our problems, where actually our mind, body, soul combination is actually speaking to us in a certain way. So whether it's giving us a stomach ache, a headache, where we feel something in the pit of our stomach when we have anxiety, or we have anger to the point of rage, road rage, these types of things, there's all these signs that something is out of balance and they're trying to tell us something. Now, it's easy to grab, this magic pill, but then I think what people find is that it's a Band-Aid. I think they say plaster in Mauritius, so it's a plaster. It's actually not getting to the root cause. And for some people, it's good enough, right? They can function, it's fine. But for others, they still suffer. And this is where I think at some point, they don't want to suffer anymore. So then sometimes it has to take a big hit for someone to be motivated to change. And for others, they have maybe lived vicariously through others' experiences and they don't want to go through that. They've seen their parents suffer, or they've seen someone in their family or their network who's struggled, and they really want to do it in a more preventative way. And as far as diabetes go, it's a perfect example, because in in Mauritius and also the US, diabetes is, when you look at mortality per capita, it's very high in Mauritius. I think it's number 2. It keeps moving, but it's number 2 in mortality per capita. Not necessarily in prevalence per capita, but in the people who die, which means that it's not managed well. And when you look at what actually manages diabetes, it's changing lifestyle. The medicine is not enough. So when we take medicine, we see blood sugar improves, but what's actually causing the blood sugar to spike and insulin to change is really the lifestyle. And when you look at the studies, there was a study from the British Whitehall, and it showed that the pancreas starts changing its insulin secretion 11 years before your fasting blood glucose changes. So silently in our body, things are happening, predisposing us to diabetes, and we're not even aware of it, because we think blood sugar is the tell-all, but that actually happens very late in the game. And so I think the more awareness people have on the fact that things take a long time to get there, and the more they're aware of the future and their health and they prioritize that, the more they're going to work on lifestyle and preventative stuff rather than just look for that magic pill.
And also what we've seen recently, I mean, perhaps I'm seeing it more now because I'm advancing in my age, but before I think people tend to think that I'm still young, I've got my whole life in front of me, I'll make the changes later. And then more and more, I've noticed recently that a lot of young people are dying, early 40s, where, you know, they look seemingly well, and you've had the, you know, a lot of people saying, but, you know, they look perfectly healthy, they just smoke a little bit. But as you said, this has been, you don't die overnight unless you're in a, you know, tragic accident. This has been building up for a while. So in terms of the people coming to see you, do you get young people as well? Do they realize that now is the time to take action as opposed to in 15 years' time?
So most of the people who come see me, because I work a lot with ambitious high achievers, and a lot of times in terms of young people, a lot of them will send me their teenage daughters, and it's more girls than boys at that age. And it's not necessarily because of this reason, it's more because of self-confidence. You know, a girl's confidence drops by 30% from age 8 to 14.
Wow.
And there's a lot of reasons for that. Part of it is biology, but the other piece is, you know, how girls interact with each other versus how boys interact. Boys tease each other a lot, and they can take
they'll
hits.
get over it.
Yeah, and girls, everything, it's quite, I mean,
personal.
they take it quite, personal and literal. So confidence, I believe, and self-worth, they're all interrelated. Self-worth, self-acceptance, self-love. And confidence is also something that we often project on the outside in one particular area. So we may be confident at work, but if someone makes a critical comment, we may be destroyed, or we may crumble inside. Or if we're worried about what someone's going to say, something like that, then we don't feel good about ourselves. So there's so many things that if you can build up someone's self-worth, not to the point of arrogance, of course, but just a solid, healthy level of self-acceptance and self-love, people are easier with themselves and they feel calmer. They don't have the anxiety. They can handle and regulate their emotions more. And health is kind of a nice next step. It's an easy motivation. It doesn't feel hard. And so I have teenagers coming to me for that. And then in terms of younger people, so most of the people that come to me are probably around the age of 40, but I have a wide range. I also have a lot of people in their 20s coming to me because of anxiety. And anxiety has increasingly risen. And I do believe self-love, self-worth is a big proponent to that. Some of it is because there's just some nice techniques that you can learn to manage anxiety, but a big portion of it is this self-doubt that creeps over a lot of people on a daily basis, and they don't know how much it's impacting their daily life.
Do you think there's a main cause of this anxiety? I mean, everyone obviously has their own individual circumstances, but for example, I think for all its goodness, I think social media has a lot of responsibility in all of that, because I think a lot of even young girls, what they see on social media or Instagram or TikTok, they think this is the reality. That's how I should sound like, that's how I should look like. Coupled with this obsession of, you know, always being on the phone and technology and scrolling down, I think it does increase our stress level, but I think it also goes hand in hand. It does increase our anxiety as well, because we feel that we have to fit in this fake world that doesn't even exist, actually. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
So my thinking is tech has an impact, but I'm thinking on a scale of more, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So that basic, you know, where we are in society now, we've moved up the ladder of needs. Before it was the physiological needs, you know, shelter, you know, then we moved to safety, violent crime, you know, people are having more shelter, things like that. Safety has gotten to a better place. Then you move to love and belonging, then esteem, and then self-actualization. And we've moved up in society in general when you look at statistics in terms of people below the poverty level and things like that. There's that coupled with the fact when you look at just, and it's not about blaming parents, but when you look at how we were raised, the old school method of bringing kids up was, you know, if someone were disciplining a child, they would get almost shamed and shunned for their behavior if they're acting out, which is understandable because there's a behavior that they shouldn't be doing. But at the same time, there's a feeling that should be addressed, and it's not addressed because the behavior seems to kind of override the feeling. So then the child understands that, okay, it's not okay for me to be angry. It's not okay to express my anger. There's something wrong with it. That's kind of the old school way. Then you have the newer school approach, which is more about, let me not let you have this feeling at all. Let me distract you.
I'll just give you everything you ask for. And,
because they don't feel comfortable with those feelings as a parent. And so at the same time, because they don't feel comfortable, they don't want their child to have to suffer through that. So then they distract them. So you've got kind of bouncing back from one extreme to the other at the end of the day, because we're still used to the old way. And then we've moved up the hierarchy. And the reason why that's important is because people are not just trying to survive anymore. They have time to think about other things. And so then we're in this predicament. And so I think really the basis of the anxiety is not having that self-trust to understand that, and the skill to learn to deal with anger, to deal with fear, to deal with disappointment or frustration, or every single emotion on the emotional scale that humans are all supposed to feel on a daily basis. And we don't know how to deal with that. So then we struggle in normal situations because it just feels foreign in a way. And I truly believe, now that I've been coaching over the years, because I started with just nutrition and then moving into this realm, this is where the deep work goes into, is just helping people with their emotions.
And I think what you said about thinking is so true. I was having breakfast with a friend this morning, and he was talking to me about a specific issue, and then he said to me, I think too much. And I said to him, have you tried meditation? And I was trying to explain it in kind of a layman's terms. And I love what Eckhart Tolle talks about, what he calls presence. And he said it's this space between two thoughts. And that's exactly that. Our life is filled with one thought after another. And I don't think we learn to stop and actually create space between these thoughts. And that contributes to anxiety, depression, all sorts of issues. So talk to us about meditation. I know that's something you feel very passionate about, and I've started doing it. I find it very hard. But I think, as anything, it's a skill that you have to learn and practice and develop. I know some people associate a certain Eastern thinking with it, so they feel a bit uncomfortable. So how did you discover meditation, and how do you think this helps us in managing our modern life?
Okay, so I think meditation is a great tool, but I think it's not always the starting point for every person.
Sure.
Because it is very hard for an overthinker to do. And I used to be a skeptic on it, because I used to think, because my mind ran 100 miles per hour, and there was no way that I could not have a thought. So the first technique I learned was transcendental meditation. And I think it's a good one, but it's also not for everyone. Sure. But there's many techniques.
That's the one with the mantra, right?
It's a mantra-based meditation. Mm-hmm. I now shortcut when I teach meditation, and I do it in a way I actually use, and I don't use a mantra, but I have taught with mantras as well. You can use it with breath, but there's a nice way, and it's from a book called Quantum Entrainment. It's quite a good one. That is my favorite way of teaching it in the fastest way possible. And most people I work with, they don't like to waste time. So it's like, let me learn this. Either I can do it or I can't.
Do it now.
Yeah, exactly. So that is a really good way to do it. But at the same time, everyone has certain meditations work differently for certain people.
Sure.
So when I think about what works, it really just depends on the person and where they're at, but I don't start there for a lot of people. I used to always start there because that seemed like a nice tip and trick. Breathing is great as well, but I really now find that a lot of, for overthinkers, for example, a lot of the time they're overthinking because they want that clarity. And if they don't feel that clarity, then it usually means that there's something deeper behind that. There's a fear. And that fear, once you address that, it almost calms you down, in a way. And so once you address that, you can calm the mind, the body, the soul down. And then it's much easier to get into a meditative practice. And then some people, it's good to, and I go in different phases. So sometimes I have a mantra-based meditation. Sometimes I'm doing breathing type of meditations. Other times I am almost in a spiritual type of meditation where I'm connecting to a source greater than me. And this is about being inspired. So it really just depends on what you need in that moment. But for someone starting and who's an overthinker, I wouldn't typically start there. And
Right.
in fact, I think it makes people more frustrated because they're trying to
And they can't do it.
to relax and they can't. But it's a great tool, and I try to use it every day. Most of the time I do, and I feel amazing afterwards.
So for someone who is an overthinker and say they've already started the work to uncover what's kind of deeper behind that, would exercise also be an alternative way of, just burning off that excess energy? Because they like doing things, and if they get into kind of an active type of exercise, do you think that help, or you just think it just kind of masks the underlying issue?
No, I think it's super helpful, especially for someone who's got a lot of energy that they need to release. Exercise is great for that. It's great for cognitive function as well. And it's just great for circulation. There's so many beautiful things about exercise. I don't know that meditation replaces it at all, but probably it depends on the person and what they need. Physical activity is needed for every single human being. Space and rest in the mind is also something that's needed, but it doesn't always have to be through meditation. Although I do like to convert skeptics to learn to meditate. It just depends on the timing. But I think it's a mix. And if you're going to choose one, it probably, exercise is probably more important if you had to choose. But there's also simple breathing techniques that you can just do in 3 breaths that will ground you. You don't have to go through a full meditation.
Yeah, and also just to kind of get the heart rate to slow down, and just to get into that, I think it's referred to as parasympathetic kind of mode just before a meeting. Or I was talking to someone else the other day, and I've started doing yoga nidra, which I find I don't find it hard to relax, but I find myself falling asleep, and then I get frustrated because you're not supposed to fall asleep, but I'll get there. And I was just talking to someone, and she said, but you could do it in your car, you could do it sitting down, you don't have to lie down, and you could do it for a few minutes before going into a meeting, just to get yourself in that relaxed state just before you go in for, if it's a high-powered meeting, etc. And I find all these little tricks are really efficient. But ultimately, I guess from what you're saying is it depends what works for you.
Right. And so what I would say with someone who's falling asleep, because this happens sometimes when I have clients we do a deep breathing and then they fall asleep, and others don't. And you know what this means? This means actually when you get into a parasympathetic state, your body actually is telling you what it needs because you're able to listen to the signs. And typically that may mean that you actually need more rest. That's what it could mean. Because when I first started meditating, I would fall asleep. I don't fall asleep anymore, and it's because I keep my rest and my energy up. Yeah. So it can mean that it's not always the case. But
sure.
The other thing is, if you want to activate that parasympathetic state to go into a meeting where you need to have your power and be grounded, and if that makes you fall asleep, then it's probably you may need to shift something in a little bit where you do it either a shortcutted version or you modify it somehow where you still feel grounded, relaxed, yet energized, and save the yoga nidra for before bed.
Yeah, before bed, exactly. That's what I've decided to do too. So what I'm trying out at the moment is I do the breath work in the morning. I do my Wim Hof breath work in the morning.
That's a great one. Yeah.
And then I try to do my yoga nidra before going to bed. I think
and Wim Hof breathing is definitely energizing.
Yeah, so. And I was just like, whoa, I can't, I still can't get to that 1.5 minutes of holding my breath. But I'm not doing too bad. It's like 1 minute and 15 seconds of holding my breath. So no, I think it's great. And you sent me a link to a talk you gave recently, which I found really enlightening. And I know one of the things that I don't think we talk enough about as women is what happens when you get into middle age, because we tend to assume is one size fits all, men are the same as women, it's the same, whereas our hormones change. What worked for us in our 20s might not necessarily work for us in our 40s and 50s. So things like, and I know it's quite a controversial area, but you did mention that in your talk, so I wanted to ask about it, is for someone, a woman going into premenopause, should she do anything different in her life? Should she be taking supplements, or if she eats well, exercise well, sleeps well, is that good enough? Generally?
Okay, oh, great question. Okay, so in fact, this was on hormone replacement therapy and perimenopause, what to expect in perimenopause and menopause. And I had done some of these talks with Dr. Karen Hartzenberg. She's one of the doctors that I work with quite often. She's a phenomenal doctor in the North. And she and I have been working through this, and I've been taking courses also on the menopause method. And I was shocked by what I had learned over the years, because I've also, as I've been in health and nutrition for some time, I'm quite pro-natural. Pro-natural to the point of hormones aren't natural, right? If you have to take something outside of what your body can do, that was my way of thinking. And when I have looked at the studies, and there have been more and more studies released, it is now more clear to me than ever that actually hormones are protective for the majority of women, protective for their health and help them prevent cognitive decline, arterial damage like to the arteries, and they help with heart health. For bone health, it's the number one estrogen is the number one treatment for and preventative treatment for osteoporosis, and also for genitourinary symptoms, so like bladder issues and vaginal atrophy and those types of things. And also it prevents all those perimenopausal and menopausal symptoms. So my current belief, which is drastically changed from what I used to believe, is that most women will benefit being on hormones as from perimenopausal years, if they're having symptoms as from perimenopausal years, and nearly all women as of menopause. Now, obviously, there are exceptions to that medically, but it's a very different approach than what I had before. And it's because when you look at what's actually natural, only 100 years ago, women were living past menopause. They weren't living past menopause up to 100 years ago. So we don't have experience in this realm at all. And at the same time, we also, when you look at what is healthy for a woman, with all the symptoms she can go through and all the health issues that she can go through without hormones versus with. And when I say with, I don't mean synthetic hormones. And I don't mean at very large superphysiological doses that you have to take orally. I mean the same type of hormone, the compound that is made in the body. That's what they call bioidentical or body identical. And so that's what's been studied. And when you look at cancer risks and things like that, the cancer risk of the transdermal, which is topical hormones, there's no risk. When you look at the synthetic oral big doses of hormones, there is a risk. So two very different things. But to answer your question, what does a perimenopausal woman need to do? Well, what happens is the hormones are actually shifting from the ovaries actually producing all these sex hormones, so your estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone, and you get it from your adrenals and your fat cells. And that's why over time a lot of women tend to gain weight. It's kind of a biological thing that happens because the fat cells can still produce those hormones. And the adrenals are basically your stress hormones. And so if someone is stressed or has been stressed nearly their whole life, usually they'll suffer more in perimenopausal symptoms if they're also not as healthy nutritionally. I don't necessarily see that you have to take supplements in perimenopausal years. However, supplements can be beneficial for certain people depending on their symptoms, their DNA, all of these things, but it doesn't mean that you have to at the perimenopause age. But for example, choline is vitamin B4, it's found in egg yolk. A woman's choline significantly drops once they go through menopause. And this is also it's a vitamin B4, it's a cognitive vitamin. And that is something that many women benefit from taking. For example, omega-3s, this is especially beneficial if someone is highly predisposed to being inflammatory in general, but then obviously helps more in the menopausal stage. So I think getting that balanced, healthy lifestyle, if you've never done it at any point, but at perimenopause, that's the time. I mean, that's the perfect time to do it because then you will have less symptoms. With that said, you can have very healthy individuals still having symptoms. And so I think 80 to 85% of women have symptoms going through menopause. And a lot of people are really scared about this. But what they've found is that taking transdermal at the appropriate dose and getting from your doctor and making sure you've got the go-ahead and all that, taking the right doses really helps prevent largely these symptoms and also is protective.
with little to no risk, as opposed to if you were
Right.
taking them orally.
And so the risk benefit for most women, if it's transdermal and it's bioidentical, the risk benefit scenario is actually, I mean, it's highly beneficial. For some people, you may have a different scenario, and that's
Sure.
why your doctor can help you with understanding and assessing that. But generally, most women would benefit from it. And this is largely different than what has been communicated for years. And so now there are menopause experts kind of sprouting up all over, especially in the US, with all the new studies coming out. And they're preaching this to an audience. And then the audience goes to their doctor, and their doctor says, no, I don't need hormones. And they're very frustrated because it's a very simple thing. And the doctor says, no, it causes cancer. Yes, but when you look at the studies, it really just depends on what you're looking at and what was the dosage and the type of study that was done and things like that. So then now I think they're trying to understand and really backpedal from this big study that was called the WHI. And that study the results came out in 2002, and headline said,
Causes HRT causes cancer.
Yeah, and then of course it was not prescribed anymore.
Yeah.
But now when you really look at the data, and people are really benefiting and being protected with estrogen at the right doses and in the right form, it's largely the benefits highly outweigh the risks.
And also, I think, as you said, if you're then going to see your doctor, it's important for the medical community as well to keep abreast of the changes. You can't rely on a study that's 20 years old when, medicine is constantly evolving and changing, and new forms of, type of medicine that would have been unacceptable has evolved to now become acceptable, and vice versa. Things that we had a doctor a few months ago, and he said that certain medicines that were prescribed for diabetes are now actually borderline dangerous, that you wouldn't prescribe that anymore. So it's important, I think, to keep abreast of, what's going on.
Right.
Yeah.
And a lot of those studies, like investigators have retracted a lot of the statements that were made anyway, because when they really looked at the data, they could see the differences.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is the most, since you've started HealthUp, what would you say has been the most challenging thing that you've come across with your clients generally? The most challenging hurdle that you find people have to cross?
Let me think for a second. Because I'm the type where there's no mountain we can't cross. I'm just thinking because sustainability is important to me. So I really focus on this to sustain. I think the most challenging hurdle in general is for the person to be ready for a change. Usually when they come to me, they're ready for that change. But there's this 7 stages of change, which is also similar to this 12 steps of grief. It's very similar, where you've got either denial, but I like to call it unawareness, where people may not know why they're having a certain symptom or why they're so stressed. So it's more like unawareness. Then they may be angry or frustrated. They may have sadness or depression. They may feel like a victim. And then they get into this very interesting stage called bargaining, which is, if I just do this quick fix, if I just do this thing,
I'll be all right,
then I'll change.
Yeah.
And there's this famous quote by Jack Dixon, and he says, if you want results, you'll never change. But if you want change, you'll get results. And so the people who are ready for the change, that's when I think that hurdle is removed. And when they come to me at that place, I like to move them out of this whole cycle into acceptance. And acceptance goes on it can get very deep into, self-acceptance, and accept where not only the issues that they've had, but also where they are up until this point. This is emotionally, mentally, physically. And then we move, and there's other phases called light emerging and creation of a new life. And it's really about creating deliberate change. And I like to use rewiring, because sometimes it's another challenge is that people, you're moving from old habits to new habits. And nobody likes to be really told what to do. They come to you because they want support. But over time, if I tell people, don't eat this and don't eat this and don't do this and don't do this, they may listen for a few days or a few weeks.
And then they'll revert back to their old habits.
And then they'll rebel like crazy because they need their power back. People really have this innate need to have freedom. And so if they don't feel free while they're on the journey, they don't feel in the way that they want to feel, they're not going to continue on that journey. So I think for me, the biggest thing was understanding if somebody wants to lose weight and they want to look, if I ask them why they want to lose weight, and they say, I want to look good in the mirror, I want to look good in my jeans. And then I say, but why? And because they want to feel happy, confident, free, vibrant, sexy, whatever it may be. And then meanwhile, they're doing crash dieting, they're exercising hardcore, and they're beating themselves up when they make a mistake. Then along that journey, they're not feeling how they want to feel. They're never really going to make it to the end. And so it's about making sure that they feel happy, confident, sexy, free, and vibrant along that entire process. And then enjoying the journey along the way makes it a whole lot easier to achieve their result. And then what they realize is actually achieving their end goal is happening every day because they're feeling that way on a daily basis.
I think the science of creating habits in the first place is amazing. I'm listening to this podcast at the moment. I love listening to Dr. Huberman. So
he's my favorite.
His podcasts are insanely long, but somehow he's got it right. I don't know how he does it, but I could easily listen to a 3-hour podcast, no problem. So I'm listening to one at the moment that he made quite a while ago about making and breaking habits. And it's not, we hear these myths about, it takes 28 days and all of this is just pop psychology. But actually, when you get into the science of making and breaking habits, if we manage to get that right, I think, as you said, potential is limitless. And then he also talked about this, habit stacking. I think that's from the Atomic Habits book that I also love. Just try to kind of make yourself accountable, but also, as you said, not beat yourself up about it. If you sleep one day, I ate cake today and I wanted to avoid cake. So what? Tomorrow's a new day. I'll start new. But I think the making and breaking of habits will go a long way in achieving that sustainability that you talked about.
Yeah, so I think it's a mix of acceptance, and then I use a process called rewiring that I use a lot of the techniques of neuroplasticity. That's how I created it, and it's a 21-day process. But it really does. It's almost neuroplasticity is the science of changing how the brain makes connections, and the most beautiful thing about it is we all know it already because we do it in sports. We do it. Practice makes things better. And so if you want to change anything, it's about practicing a thought, a belief, any activity, any action that we want to do it's just about practicing that. And if we didn't do it the right way, visualization has a very profound impact as well. I mean, you take basketball players, they did a study throwing free throws for 15 minutes a day. They improved over the group who didn't practice by 24%. The group who just thought about throwing free throws for 15 minutes a day for 2 weeks improved over the control group by 23%. Wow. So just visualizing yourself doing it the right way or thinking through the right way or public speaking or whatever it is you want to, whatever goal that you want to achieve, you can visualize has a huge, profound impact on the outcome without even having to do it.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different techniques through, and so neuroscience is one of the best ways to get through change and to rewire someone's habits. So Huberman is fantastic.
Yeah, no, he's amazing. Last question for you, Lindsay. Very important question. How can people get in touch with you?
Okay, so I'm on social media and I also Instagram, Facebook, not much on LinkedIn, but I have my website, HealthUpWithLindsay.com. In Mauritius, they say Lindsay, but it's Lindsay. But in America, for some reason, they pronounce it Lindsay, although they spell it Lindsay. So HealthUp, HealthUp with LINDSAY.com. Yeah.
And your perfect profile, would you say, I guess you take all sorts of clients, but would you say, as you described earlier, high achievers, busy people who want to make a meaningful change in their lives?
That's pretty good. And I mean, just basically anyone who's either a super parent, a high achiever, someone who's ambitious, a leader who really wants to find health and joy in their life and get to a better place. So some people have health symptoms, some people have anxiety, anger management issues, some people feel unfulfilled. There's a lot of achievers that externally we look outside of ourselves to feel that happiness, and it works for so long. And then after a while, we realize, okay, we've ticked all these boxes, whether it's marriage, kids, house, job, promotion, all these things, travel, all the things that you could ever want. And then there's something still missing, and it's actually here. It's not
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah,
And it's helping people
absolutely.
find that. And I love to help people to get to a better place.
Wonderful. Thank you for the work that you do. I think there should be more people like you here.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you for sharing all these inspiring people that you bring on here. It's
okay.
wonderful that you do what you do and you found
you.
meaning. And I was saying before we started the podcast, I mean, you have a high profile job and you're very busy in that, but you've also found meaning in something else outside of that. And that's a beautiful thing.
Thank you. It's my little habit that I've created, that no matter what's going on in my life, more often than I would say 9.9 times out of 10, I make sure Tuesday afternoon, 2 p.m., I'm on my sofa and I'm doing the podcast. And it's something that I've had to kind of rewire the right neurons in my brain, because as I said, I feel that perhaps I'm too harsh on myself. I feel that if I miss it for a couple of weeks, it's easy to let go of the habit. So I just make sure I keep the consistency. And I think that's just generally how I try to live life. Although you can be too hard on yourself when you, when you get into a mind frame that you always have to be consistent. But anyway.
Can I ask you a quick question on
Sure.
this? Do you find that it's impacted your work indirectly just by doing this?
Yeah, I find I'm better in my work.
Yeah.
I find I'm better in my work. I'm better at, not the technical work, because the technical work is there and I've always been pretty good at it. I'm better at understanding people, reading people, just being more empathetic and compassionate. So I'm very grateful for that.
Oh, good. Those are beautiful qualities to grow. So that's fantastic.
Thank you.